The mysterious death of 21-year-old Tommy Burkett on December 1st, 1991, has led to numerous theories as to what actually happened. And I'm going to tell you straight up, the police initially said that Tommy did it to himself. And by the end of this segment, you're going to wonder who in their right mind could think that. A junior at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia, Tommy was found dead in his parents' home in Herndon, Virginia, while home for Thanksgiving weekend. On the evening of November 30th, 1991, Tommy visited a friend's house in Centerville, Virginia. He left around midnight and was captured on an ATM camera making a withdrawal, during which 3 unidentified men approached him. At 2 a.m., Tommy called his parents, informing them he'd be home by noon for a family outing. The following morning, as his parents were leaving the house to run errands, they heard squealing tires. Witnesses later reported seeing Tommy's blue Mustang being chased by a larger, dark vehicle. Despite these events, Tommy's parents were unaware of any immediate danger. They returned home that afternoon, left again for another event, and upon their final return around 6 p.m., they discovered Tommy's lifeless body in his room. The scene presented several inconsistencies. Tommy was seated on a sofa, a magnum in his hand, with a wound to the head. However, the cylinder was unlatched, and there were no fingerprints on the weapon or cartridges. Additionally, Tommy's glasses, wallet, and driver's license were missing. 2 days later, his parents found his driver's license in his dorm room, turned in by an unidentified student. These irregularities raised immediate suspicions. Further investigation by Tommy's parents uncovered more troubling details. Neighbors reported seeing Tommy's car being chased and run off the road on the day of his death. Some even witnessed a dark sedan parked near the Burkett residence around the time of the incident. Weeks later, Tommy's mother noticed small reddish stains on the home's stairway, which a bloodstain expert confirmed as spatter inconsistent with a self-deletion wound. These findings suggested a violent altercation occurred elsewhere in the house. Seeking clarity, the Burketts had Tommy's body exhumed for a second autopsy. This examination revealed unexplained abrasions, bruising on his right ear, and a broken jaw. Additionally, Tommy had made 2 911 calls in the months leading up to his death, both of which were mysteriously deleted from official records. When his mother inquired about these calls, authorities initially acknowledged them, but later denied their existence, further deepening the mystery. However, some have suggested that this may have been a misreading of a computer screen by administrative staff. A potential motive emerged from rumors that Tommy had been acting as an undercover informant for the DEA at Marymount University. It's speculated he uncovered substance activities on campus, which may have led to his targeting. However, the DEA officially denied any connection to Tommy, and no concrete evidence has substantiated this theory. As of today, Tommy Burkett's death remains officially classified as a self-deletion, leaving many questions unanswered and his case unresolved. There's simply too much that doesn't add up for anyone to confidently say, Tommy Burkett ended himself. From the missing fingerprints on the weapon to the second autopsy revealing potential signs of a struggle, this case all but screams foul play. Once you lay out the actual timeline, nothing really appears to fit the police theory. Tommy being chased by another vehicle, neighbors noticing strange activity, his missing identification mysteriously reappearing in his dorm room, the previous 911 calls. None of it adds up to self-deletion. But here's the catch. When authorities fail to conduct a thorough investigation from day one, they essentially stack the deck against getting any real resolution. Critical records go missing, potential eyewitnesses aren't fully vetted, and leads slip through the cracks. Over time, evidence is lost or becomes inadmissible, and witnesses' memories fade. That means if there really were perpetrators involved, if Tommy was in fact silenced for something he knew, they're probably in the clear now, unfortunately. Once law enforcement starts with a certain assumption and refuses to deviate, it poisons every investigative avenue that follows. Ultimately, a shoddy initial investigation doesn't just shortchange Tommy and his family, it virtually guarantees that the truth remains buried and justice is never achieved. Big shout out to subscriber and YouTube member Bumblebee48 for this great suggestion during a live stream. Remember, if your suggestion makes it into a video, I'll give you a shout out as well. Hit me up in the comments or join the Discord. Jack Quinn, born on January 7, 1940, was a trusted figure in the banking security industry. As Vice President and General Manager of Federal Protection Services, he oversaw operations for a company that provided security and armed guards to banks and other financial institutions. His company handled millions of dollars in cash daily. On the morning of April 9, 1988, Quinn arrived at his office early, as was his routine. A supervisor named Harry Goldberg was the only other employee present. Throughout the morning, Goldberg observed Quinn in his office, appearing calm and composed. Unbeknownst to Goldberg, Quinn was executing a meticulously planned theft. He spent the morning inside the company vault, transferring cash into boxes. Quinn loaded approximately $1.3 million in untraceable bills into the trunk of his company car and placed an additional $107,000 into the trunk of his personal vehicle. After securing the money, Quinn asked Goldberg to follow him to his home, where he left his personal car. He briefly spoke with his wife, then returned to the office with Goldberg. Quinn then departed alone in the company car, which contained over $1 million, and drove to Palm Beach International Airport. Upon arrival, he transferred the money into suitcases and vanished without a trace. Investigators found no evidence of him boarding a plane, renting a car, or taking a taxi from the airport. Quinn's disappearance shocked his family and colleagues. When he failed to return home, his wife contacted his office, but received no information about his whereabouts. The following day, she discovered $107,000 in the trunk of their car and a letter from Quinn admitting to wrongdoing and expressing his inability to face the consequences. She promptly turned the money and letter over to the police to help further the investigation into her missing husband. The investigation into Quinn's background revealed troubling details. He had previously been suspected of stealing $70,000 from a former employer before joining Federal Protection Services. Also, how the heck do you get a job at a place where you're in direct control of extremely large sums of cash without very significant background checks? I wonder what the implications of this apparent lapse was for any insurance policies covering such losses by Federal Protection Services, but I wasn't able to find any info on this. Additionally, the IRS was pursuing him for a substantial sum in unpaid taxes, which may have motivated his crime to avoid financial ruin and potential incarceration. There were also reports of Quinn engaging in an extramarital affair, with suspicions that he used early morning hours to meet his girlfriend before work. In 1992, the FBI was alerted to his then current location, Houston, Texas, when he took out a fraudulent driver's license in the name of one of his family members. Despite extensive efforts, authorities have been unable to locate Jack Quinn. The authorities believe he may have assumed the alias Calvin Clucky and could be residing in Hawaii or near Baltimore, Maryland, as of the 1990s. Also, just a little piece of advice. If you're gonna go on the lam, choose a name like William Davis for your fake identity. Calling yourself Calvin Clucky is just asking for everyone to remember your name. People will start calling you Plucky Calvin Clucky and won't be able to forget you. If one were to adopt a William Davis type persona, it's generic enough to be forgettable, but not generic enough to raise suspicion like, let's say, John Smith. But I digress, let's get back to the case. Since he's fluent in Spanish, some have suggested that he may have fled to a Latin American country after his close call in the Lone Star State. The FBI believes that he is potentially still alive, and there's an active and ongoing investigation into his location. Personally, I'm a big fan of the he fled to Latin America theory. Jack Quinn fleeing to Mexico in 1992 is highly plausible given its proximity to Houston, his Spanish fluency, and the border's looser controls at the time. With access to cash, forged IDs, and overland routes, he could have crossed discreetly and vanished into a major city like Mexico City or a tourist hub with large expat communities. Mexico's cash-driven economy and enough cultural similarities make it an ideal hiding spot, while its jurisdictional challenges can complicate U.S. law enforcement efforts. Quinn likely avoided detection by keeping a low profile, moving frequently, and relying on cash to evade paper trails. I think the most likely way this one gets cracked is if he ended up having another family after going on the lam, and they connect on a genetic testing website. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a shout out to all my subscribers, patrons, and YouTube members. Remember to hit the like button and share this video with anyone who's curious about the unknown. Gettysburg's reputation as one of the most haunted places in America is deeply tied to the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg, which occurred over 3 days in July 1863, was one of the conflict's deadliest, with over 50,000 casualties. This immense loss of life has led many to believe the area is haunted by the spirits of those who perished there. Across the battlefield and in various historical sites, people have reported ghostly encounters that seem to keep the past alive. Devil's Den is one of the most notorious spots in Gettysburg. This rocky formation witnessed intense fighting during the battle, and some say the spirits of fallen soldiers linger. Visitors have described seeing ghostly soldiers appearing and disappearing among the boulders, and many hear inexplicable cannon fire and the screams of men. One eerie phenomenon noted is that cameras often malfunction in this area, as if the energies present interfere with technology. Nearby, the triangular field is another hotspot for paranormal activity. Confederate soldiers took positions here during the battle, and many died. Modern visitors claim to have seen their apparitions moving stealthily through the field. The ghostly cries of soldiers and distant drum beats are frequent occurrences, adding to the unsettling ambiance. On numerous occasions, visitors have felt cold chills or an unseen presence passing by. The hauntings extend beyond the battlefield. The Jenny Wade House is another famous location. Jenny Wade, the only civilian casualty of the battle, was killed while baking bread for Union soldiers. Her death occurred when a stray bullet penetrated 2 doors and struck her in the back. Today, her home serves as a museum, and many visitors claim to feel Jenny's presence. Some have reported hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, or even catching glimpses of her shadow moving through the house. Sachs-covered bridge, built before the battle, is another eerie site associated with Gettysburg. Legend has it that 3 Confederate soldiers were slain there after being caught trying to desert. Today, people report seeing ghostly figures in the area surrounding the bridge. Some even claim to smell smoke, suggesting the lingering presence of these soldiers. Iverson's Pits, where Confederate soldiers from North Carolina were ambushed and killed, has had a long history of ghostly sightings. The mass grave where they were buried became a place of fascination, as reports of eerie lights and spectral figures emerged. The atmosphere of Gettysburg, charged with the memory of thousands of deaths and the remnants of Civil War violence, often elicits heightened responses from visitors. The combination of the town's history and its eerie landscapes like Devil's Den and Triangular Field, and the power of collective memory, creates an environment ripe for ghostly sightings. Further, visitors primed with tales of the supernatural may interpret natural sounds or sights, like fog patches, shifting shadows, or sudden chills, as paranormal encounters. This psychological phenomenon, fueled by the town's haunted reputation, blurs the line between reality and imagination. Anyway, I'd love to hear in the comments whether you've had any bizarre experiences at Gettysburg. The 1896 H.G. Shaw incident is one of the earliest recorded cases of an alleged alien encounter, taking place long before the wave of UFO sightings and abduction stories that became common. On November 25, 1896, Colonel H.G. Shaw, accompanied by his friend Camille Spooner, was traveling by horse and buggy through the countryside near Stockton, California. Shaw was a well-regarded man in his community and was in charge of organizing an exhibition for an upcoming fair in Fresno. The quiet journey was abruptly interrupted when their horse froze in terror. The cause of the animal's fear soon became clear. 3 humanoid figures emerged from the roadside, described as being around 7 feet tall, with spindly limbs and hair covering their bodies. Shaw and Spooner noted that these beings had large eyes, small mouths, and no noticeable ears. Shaw's description of the beings goes further, detailing how they communicated in a strange, chirping manner and carried bags with hoses, which they appeared to use for breathing. The beings also possessed egg-shaped lamps that emitted a soft glow. When the two attempted to interact with the entities, Shaw reported that the beings made efforts to abduct them. However, the aliens were unsuccessful, seemingly lacking the physical strength necessary to overpower the Shaw and Spooner. Also, I just realized as I was editing the video that I called him the Shah, like he's the Shah of Iran or something. I thought about fixing that up, but since it gave me a sensible chuckle, I've decided to keep it in. After failing to kidnap Shaw and Spooner, the beings retreated towards a bridge, where their cigar-shaped craft hovered over the water. The spacecraft itself was described as roughly 150 feet long and 25 feet in diameter. As Shaw and Spooner watched, the beings gracefully leaped into the air and entered their craft, which then swiftly ascended and disappeared from sight. Shaw was convinced that the beings were from Mars, a common belief during the era when the notion of Martian life captured the imagination of the public. Some speculate that this was one of the first documented alien abduction events in the modern age. Others have speculated that the story was made up by local papers at the time as a sensationalistic way to sell papers. And if you know anything about the newspaper industry in the 19th century, well, let's just say that hypothesis doesn't sound half bad. Another theory suggests that Shaw and Spooner needed an explanation for why these two opposite-gendered quote-unquote friends took so long in the woods. And yeah, under that theory, they came up with Martians. The ancient Druids have long held a place in popular imagination, often depicted as mysterious and wise Celtic priests deeply connected to the woods. Over the centuries, Druids have been romanticized and reimagined, and today there are groups who consciously identify as modern Druids, drawing inspiration from ancient Celtic spirituality. The ancient Druids flourished in Celtic cultures primarily between approximately 300 BC and the Roman conquest of Gaul and Britain in the 1st centuries BC and AD respectively. The word Druid likely derives from a combination of Proto-Celtic terms, suggesting an association with oak trees and wisdom. Oak trees held symbolic importance and were closely associated with the natural world that Druids revered. The Druids were active in regions spanning parts of modern-day Ireland, Britain, and continental Europe, wherever Celtic tribes settled. Though their influence varied over time and geography, Druids appear to have shared certain broad similarities. They acted as intermediaries between people and the divine. They held responsibilities in passing on tribal and natural lore and delivering legal judgments, and guided magical nature rituals. One of the main challenges in studying historical Druids lies in the limited primary sources available. The Celts, including the Druids, passed down their traditions orally, and didn't maintain their own written records. Much of what we know comes from descriptions by Greek and Roman authors, including Julius Caesar, who wrote about the Druids in his commentaries on the Gallic War. Caesar described them as a class of priests who oversaw religious ceremonies, served as judges in disputes, educated the youth, and wielded considerable political influence. The Druids' religious practices focused on maintaining harmony with nature and the spiritual realm, often involving sacred groves, which were forest clearings considered holy places. Trees, especially oaks and mistletoe, featured prominently in their rituals. Okay, so I've got to address an extremely popular misconception about Druids here for a moment, and some of you are definitely going to have your minds blown by this fact. While popular culture frequently associates Druids with Stonehenge, historical Druids didn't play a role in the construction of this Neolithic monument built millennia before they existed. That said, it's open to interpretation whether the Druids used Stonehenge as a holy site, but most modern scholars think these are modern inventions. Modern Druidry, sometimes called Druidism, has taken root as a nature-based spiritual path embraced by people worldwide. And yeah, they missed the opportunity to call it Druidism in my view, but perhaps not everyone is as big a fan of wordplay as I am. Many modern Druids are motivated by environmental concerns, a desire to reconnect with the natural world, and an interest in Celtic mythology and spirituality. Modern Druid rituals often revolve around the seasonal festivals associated with Celtic traditions, such as Samhain, as well as the solstices and equinoxes. Also, I found out a couple months back that Samhain is actually pronounced Samhain, but honestly, I don't think most people would know what the heck I'm talking about. On July 16, 1993, the quiet community of Arnold, Pennsylvania, was shaken by the brutal slaying of 74-year-old Stephanie Coyle. Living alone in a modest garage apartment behind 4th Avenue, Coyle was known for her kindness and active involvement in the local senior center. Coyle's body was discovered by her landlord after she failed to report for her volunteer shift at the New Kensington Senior Center. I'm not going into the details of the crime because they're simply too brutal, but let me just give you an idea with reference to what the experts are saying. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a renowned forensic pathologist with 50 years of experience, described it as one of the most brutal slayings he had ever encountered. Despite extensive investigations by local law enforcement and the involvement of the FBI's Behavioral Crimes Unit, the case quickly went cold. Over the years, various leads were pursued, including the possibility that the killer was someone familiar with Coyle, or at the very least, the neighborhood. In the decades following the slaying, Coyle's family, particularly her son Dan, has been relentless in seeking justice. They've offered rewards, distributed posters, and hired private investigators to unearth new leads. Despite all this, no meaningful new leads have been turned up at this point. Recent advancements in forensic technology have rekindled hope for a resolution. In 2024, the Westmoreland County District Attorney's Office announced the hiring of Texas-based Othram Inc. to evaluate DNA samples from cold cases. This is a company which has been mentioned a few times before in this series that aims to generate new leads through genetic genealogy. It was confirmed later in 2024 that Stephanie's case wouldn't be one of the first cases looked at by Othram, possibly due to investigative elements that haven't been released to the public. For instance, the authorities may have a very good idea who the perpetrator is, and if that perpetrator's deceased, there may be more pressing cases to solve first. Otherwise, I find it difficult to justify how such a truly brutal slaying wouldn't be on the absolute top of any such list for genetic genealogy investigation. I remain cautiously optimistic that I'll have a resolution to this case to report on in a future episode of this series. Shout out to Axe Onslaught for giving this obscure suggestion on a recent live stream. John Cheek, born on August 3, 1965, was a promising financial executive working in Memphis, Tennessee. He earned a bachelor's degree from Southern Methodist University and an MBA from the University of Chicago. By age 28, he had become the chief financial officer of the Cates Company, a prominent real estate firm in Memphis. He Company was on the verge of going public, a move that would have significantly increased Cheek's financial standing, potentially elevating his salary and granting him $2 million in stock options. As of 2025, this would be just shy of $5 million. Not a bad payday at all. In late 1993, Cheek was deeply involved in the company's transition to a public real estate investment trust. This period was marked by intense work, with Cheek reportedly working 18-hour days and traveling extensively to cities like Milwaukee, Portland, and Denver to meet with investors. The process faced unexpected delays due to questions from the Securities and Exchange Commission, adding to the pressure he was under. Despite these challenges, the deal was eventually completed, and an audit found no evidence of wrongdoing on Cheek's part. However, by then, Cheek had disappeared and never received the financial rewards he had anticipated. On the evening of December 2nd, 1993, after returning from a business trip, Cheek had dinner with a business associate at the Cooker restaurant in Memphis. He was reportedly drinking heavily during the dinner. Around 11 p.m., his associate dropped him off at the Crescent Center, where his vehicle was parked. This was the last confirmed sighting of Cheek, though I say confirmed here because things are about to get weird in a moment. The following morning, when Cheek failed to appear at work, his parents filed a missing persons report. Investigations revealed that his suitcases were unpacked at his new home in East Memphis, and towels his mother had placed on his bed had been moved, indicating he had been there. Notably, the garage door was also found open, and it's not clear from the evidence how long it had been left that way. Later that morning, his car was discovered abandoned near the Memphis, Arkansas bridge, which spans the Mississippi River. There were no signs of a struggle or any indication of his whereabouts. Authorities initially considered the possibility of self-deletion, speculating that Cheek might have jumped into the Mississippi River. However, extensive searches yielded no evidence to support this theory. Friends and family dismissed the idea, describing Cheek as an extremely driven and successful individual who was just on the verge of achieving a major life goal. In the months following his disappearance, there were several reported sightings of a man matching Cheek's description in various locations, including in Virginia and Arkansas. One notable sighting occurred in February 1994 at a truck stop in Rafine, Virginia, where a trucker believed he had interacted with Cheek. This trucker described the man as appearing to be disoriented and unaware of his identity. Notably, this wasn't just a quick passing sighting by the trucker. The trucker, being a good Samaritan and seeing a guy down on his luck, decided to buy the man breakfast and eat together with him. The man told the trucker that he was previously staying at a homeless shelter in Arkansas. Some speculated that Cheek might have been experiencing a dissociative fugue state, a rare condition triggered by extreme stress, leading to amnesia and unplanned travel. However, none of these sightings were conclusively verified. Despite extensive investigations, Cheek's whereabouts remain unknown, and in August 2000, he was legally declared dead. The Cates Company proceeded with its plans and went public in early 1994 as Mid-America Apartment Communities, Inc., a real estate investment trust. As of today, the company still trades on the New York Stock Exchange and has a market cap of just under $20 billion. Given the unusual nature of his disappearance, a number of theories have been talked about online. Some observers point to the high-pressure environment Cheek was under, working 18-hour days and traveling extensively, as a potential catalyst for him to walk away. By late 1993, The pending transition of the Cates Company into a public real estate investment trust may have brought extraordinary stress. It's theorized that he might have abandoned his old identity and begun anew under the radar, possibly motivated by a desire to escape the responsibilities and intensity of the corporate world. Proponents of this theory note that starting over could have offered him a clean slate, free from the obligations he found overwhelming. Still, there is no concrete evidence that Cheek planned or arranged for a deliberate disappearance, leaving this theory rooted in speculation rather than fact. Another theory is that Cheek somehow became entangled with criminal elements, whether through business dealings, financial disputes, or inadvertently. In this scenario, Cheek might have witnessed something, or owed a debt he couldn't repay, and was forcibly disappeared. However, law enforcement found no direct clues hinting at foul play in his car or his home, and investigators never confirmed any such criminal connections. I was able to find some very speculative theories online about two of his frat brothers disappearing under unusual circumstances during the same time period. That said, I wasn't able to find anything to corroborate this. A third explanation is that Cheek experienced a dissociative fugue, a rare psychiatric condition triggered by extreme stress, causing permanent amnesia. The period when he was working upwards of 18 hours a day, coupled with SEC delays and the looming IPO, could have created an immense psychological burden. The reported sightings of a man who resembled Cheek in Arkansas and Virginia, particularly the truck driver's account of a disoriented individual, lend some weight to this possibility. Still, no one definitively verified these sightings as Cheek, and over time, the trail went cold. If he were suffering from a prolonged fugue state, he could theoretically still be alive with little to no memory of his previous life. Also, quick note as I'm just editing and finalizing this now, and I realize I didn't mention the truck driver's name, which seems like a pretty big oversight given his good deed. Anyway, big shout out to Ron Jackson doing a kind act for an individual who was clearly in trouble, and sitting down with him and hearing him out when most people would have just ignored him. His daughter appears to have posted about the incident in February 2024, and she confirmed that he's still alive and thinks about what happened to Cheek till this day. So if you're listening and your dad is interested in talking more about this case, please reach out. It would be very interesting to actually conduct an interview with a primary source for one of the cases discussed in this series. The show jumping horse elimination scandal, spanning from the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s, stands as one of the most egregious episodes in sporting history that basically no one has heard of. During this period, numerous high-value show-jumping horses were deliberately slain to fraudulently collect insurance payouts. The exact number of horses put out to pasture remains uncertain, but estimates suggest it could be as high as 100. The motivations behind these slayings varied from case to case. Some owners facing financial difficulties saw insurance fraud as a quick solution. Others, having invested in overvalued or underperforming horses, chose to eliminate these animals to recoup their losses through insurance claims. In some instances, con men would trick wealthy individuals into purchasing overvalued horses. When the deception risked exposure, the horses were knocked off. A central figure in this scandal was Tommy the Sandman Burns. He earned his nickname because his specialty was putting innocent horses to sleep, if you know what I mean. Burns traveled the circuit with equipment designed to electrocute horses, a method he believed was quick and painless. Just kidding. He believed this method would be undetectable by insurance companies. For fees ranging from $5,000 to $40,000, he destroyed horses on behalf of their owners, who would then file fraudulent insurance claims. Burns's operations were extensive. At one point, evidence suggests he was electrocuting up to 3 horses a week. Burns ended up taking a plea deal, and over the course of the 90s, 35 people were convicted for this disturbing fraud. But where's the mystery, then, you may ask? Well, the most obvious mystery is that we don't really know the full extent of this fraud and how many people were involved. Notably, a lot of very wealthy and influential people were involved. And as tends to happen in these sorts of cases, we don't ever seem to get the full story. It kind of reminds me of a famous individual who definitely deleted himself fully voluntarily on August 10th, 2019, and whose client list has never been fully released. But there's also a human elimination associated with this case as well. One of the horse scammers attempted to negotiate a fraudulent horse transaction with Helen Brack, a wealthy heiress, in 1977. When she realized the whole transaction was a dog and pony show with sinister underpinnings, she told one of the scammers she would be reaching out to the district attorney. After leaving a medical appointment and while on her way to meet with someone from the DA's office, she disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. And yes, I'll be covering her case in depth in a future episode in this series. Haitian Voodoo is a syncretic religion that emerged in Haiti during the colonial era and has its roots in various West and Central African spiritual traditions. Over time, it blended with elements of Roman Catholicism, introduced by the French colonial presence, resulting in a complex religious and esoteric system. The historical origins of voodoo can be traced back to the 17th and 18th centuries, when the island of Hispaniola was a French colony named Saint-Domingue. Africans, primarily from regions corresponding to modern-day Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Congo area, brought with them distinct spiritual practices and cosmologies. These traditions, known as Vodun, carried a pantheon of spirits, ancestral reverence, and an understanding of the divine infused in everyday life, the usuals of an animistic belief system. This syncretic blending was facilitated by a shared spiritual logic. The African deities, known as Loa in Haitian Voodoo, were likened to Catholic saints. The Africans often took advantage of the Catholic practice of venerating saints, depicted in statues and images, to represent their own African spirits, thereby preserving their traditions. This identification wasn't just a pragmatic necessity to keep traditions alive. It reflected a mutual understanding that divine forces manifest in numerous ways. The people understood certain saints to be manifestations of the gods they had previously worshipped, based on overlapping powers and abilities associated with them. Haitian voodoo ceremonies often involve singing, drumming, spirit possession, and offerings to the Loa, who act as intermediaries between humans and the Supreme Creator. Participants might dance and sing in rhythmic patterns, facilitating a trance state that allows spirits to possess an individual, temporarily speaking through them to offer guidance. One prominent magical practice in Haitian voodoo is the preparation of gris-gris, small amulets or pouches filled with herbs, powders, and charged with spiritual energy. These objects are believed to offer protection, attract love, or bring luck. Another key practice is spiritual baths, which cleanse negative energies and restore balance, often involving sacred water, herbs, and prayers. However, there's a darker side of voodoo practice, and priests called bokor can be hired to curse enemies or create potions with disturbing effects. Perhaps most famously, these bokor can be hired to create zombies, which I'll be discussing later in this video. Notably, while voodoo dolls are often associated with Haitian voodoo in popular culture, they don't figure prominently in Haitian practice. Instead, the prevalence of voodoo dolls comes from Louisiana voodoo, which, while similar to the Haitian variant, is different enough that I'll be looking into it separately later. Hey, it's your boy Jimmy here with a quick shout out to all my subscribers, patrons, and YouTube members. Also, remember to click that share button and send this video to all your friends and family. McFarlane's Bear is a cryptid rooted in a single historical encounter from 1864 in Canada's Northwest Territories. Inuit hunters eliminated a large, yellow-furred bear and provided its skin and skull to Roderick McFarlane, a naturalist and Hudson's Bay Company trader. McFarlane sent these remains to the Smithsonian Institution, as was the style at the time, where they remain stored till this day. In 1918, Dr. Clinton Hart Merriam examined the specimen and proposed it belonged to a new genus and species, naming it Vetularctos inopinatus, meaning ancient unexpected bear. This classification was based on the bear's unique characteristics, notably its pale tan fur and an unusually shaped skull, which did not align with known bear species of the time. Over the years, several theories have emerged regarding the true identity of McFarlane's bear. One prominent hypothesis suggests that it was a polar bear-grizzly hybrid. Such hybrids, known as growler bears, or pizzlies, are rare but have been documented, exhibiting physical traits intermediate between the two species. And yes, in case you're wondering, the moment I read the word pizzly, I knew that I'd be working that word into the script. According to some theorists and experts, the pale fur and skull morphology of McFarlane's specimen align with characteristics observed in these hybrids. Another theory posits that McFarlane's bear could have been a surviving representative of a Pleistocene-era species. Under this theory, it potentially represents a relict population that persisted beyond its extinction timeline. This idea stems from the bear's distinct features, which some researchers believe may not correspond entirely with known modern species or hybrids. The Smithsonian has occasionally let experts examine the remains, but as yet no DNA testing has been conducted. Given where we're at with DNA technology, and given that we've literally got what remains of the body sitting in a box in Washington, let's get it out and test it. Also, maybe I've just been watching too much American Dad in the background while working on scripts, but I can't help think that Ted 3 should be a documentary on McFarlane's bear. The tale of the man from Taured takes place in July 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, where a man allegedly arrived with a passport from a country named Taured. For those not incredibly familiar with the geography of the 1950s, this is a nation that does not exist on any known map and never has at any point. The mysterious man claimed that Taured was located between France and Spain, precisely where Andorra is situated. Despite this assertion, when he was shown a map, he became agitated, insisting that his country had existed for over 1,000 years. The man also carried documentation, including a passport and currency, that supported his claims of being from Taured, all of which puzzled the Japanese authorities. They detained him in a hotel room under guard while they conducted further investigations. However, the next morning, the man had vanished without a trace, leaving no sign of how he might have escaped, especially given that the room had no balcony and was several floors up. Some suggest that the man was a traveler from a parallel dimension where Taured is a real country, and that he somehow crossed over into our reality before slipping back into his own. Despite the mysterious allure of the story, many researchers believe it may be rooted in a much more mundane event involving a man named John Allen Kuchar Zagros. In 1960, Zagros was arrested in Japan after presenting a forged passport from a fictional country called Taured. His passport was written in an unknown language, and Zagros claimed to be an intelligence agent, traveling on orders from an Arab international organization. While the man from Taured tale remains a fascinating piece of modern folklore, most evidence suggests it grew out of a simpler, more mundane event involving Zagros. His forged passport from the non-existent country appears to have provided the small grain of reality on which the myth was built. Over time, this story has been repeatedly embellished, becoming a modern myth. Another theory suggests that the man from Taured could have been an ethnic Tuareg, a stateless Berber people who live in North Africa and the Sahel. Under this theory, Japanese authorities may have been confused by the rather unusual-looking Berber script and believed his documents were fake. And yeah, this is one of those moments where you're going to want to look at the screen because I can almost guarantee you've never seen this alphabet before. That said, I haven't been able to find any evidence that any countries in the 1950s were issuing passports using the Berber script. I suspect the passports for all the countries where a Tuareg person likely could have come from would have been either in French or, less likely at the time, Arabic. Zombies have become familiar figures in popular culture, often seen lumbering across movie screens or shambling through the pages of horror novels. Yet, behind the fictional ghouls that dominate modern media lies a disturbing tradition, one originating in the occult practices of Haitian voodoo. The word zombie is widely believed to derive from West African terms such as nzambi or zumbi, which refer to spirits or the souls of the dead. Within Haitian voodoo cosmology, the spirit world exists in constant interaction with the living, and the soul can be subject to manipulation by powerful ritualists known as bokors. The traditional Haitian zombie isn't a ghoul, but rather a reanimated corpse or living person whose soul or willpower has been stolen. Haitian folklore describes bokors as having the knowledge to poison individuals, induce a death-like state, and then later revive them as mindless servants. According to these narratives, the victim's sense of self is destroyed, leaving them vulnerable to the bokor's commands. This practice, while rare and clearly legally forbidden, serves as a powerful cultural metaphor in Haiti. The Haitian Penal Code has historically included statutes outlawing zombification, treating it as a capital offense. This, of course, was direct legal recognition that someone could be zombified, stripped of their will, and made to appear dead. One of the most significant investigations was conducted by Wade Davis, an ethnobotanist who traveled to Haiti in the 1980s. Davis aimed to identify compounds that bokors allegedly used to transform the living into zombies. He proposed that a combination of tetrodotoxin, a potent neurotoxin found in pufferfish, and other locally sourced chemicals could induce a death-like coma. This would slow bodily functions to the point where a victim might be presumed dead and later retrieved and revived by the bokor. According to Davis, once the victim regained consciousness, their psychological trauma and cultural conditioning could lead them to behave like a docile servant. Davis's research was met with some skepticism. Critics argued that his chemical analyses were inconclusive and that cultural or psychological factors may play a larger role. However, it remains one of the most comprehensive attempts to verify the scientific legitimacy of Haitian zombification. Indeed, there are documented cases that lend credibility to at least some of Davis's claims. Take, for instance, the story of Clervius Narcisse, a Haitian man who allegedly died in 1962, was buried, and later reappeared in 1980. Narcisse claimed he had been resurrected as a zombie and forced to work on a plantation, only to escape later when the bokor controlling him died. This bizarre tale sparked scientific curiosity and public fascination, prompting Davis's investigations. While no conclusive proof emerged that Narcisse truly died and was resurrected, medical records did show that he was pronounced dead and buried. Records also showed that he had been placed in a morgue for over a day before being buried. His reappearance suggested that either he had been misdiagnosed and buried alive, or that something even more extraordinary and sinister had taken place. Others have suggested the person who reappeared in 1962 wasn't actually Clervius Narcisse, but an individual who stole the identity of a dead man to profit off a zombie narrative. In more recent times, global popular culture has embraced the zombie. detaching it almost entirely from its Haitian roots. The modern zombie owes its popularity largely to George Romero's film Night of the Living Dead and its successors, which reimagine zombies as undead hordes. These zombies, too, are often removed from their occult context, instead providing a science fiction-based theme for why people turned into zombies. So like many of you, I'm a fan of zombies, having consumed probably thousands of hours of zombie-based content over the course of my life. From an occult perspective, zombies are endlessly fascinating because they embody the interplay between life, death, and the unknown forces that govern our existence. The idea that the soul or essence of a person could have partially or wholly departed while the body remains animated is both deeply disturbing and fascinating. In Haitian voodoo lore, the creation of a zombie is tied to the idea of spiritual entrapment. The Bokors, who manipulate individuals into a zombified state, highlight the dark potential of spiritual knowledge when used irresponsibly. They represent the ultimate loss of self, a soulless existence driven by the will of another. I find this theme particularly compelling because it forces us to question what makes us human. Zombies broke out of their original context in Haitian voodoo and into science fiction and pop culture due to their profound symbolic flexibility. In modern narratives, they embody fears of societal collapse, black swan events, and the loss of individuality, resonating with a global audience. The zombie archetype adapts seamlessly to different genres, representing everything from biological experimentation gone wrong to apocalyptic survival scenarios to evil rituals. Anyway, thanks for joining me in another dive into the unexplained. Peace out, everyone. Kenny Veach, an experienced hiker and YouTuber from Las Vegas, Nevada, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in November 2014. He vanished while searching for a peculiar cave he had previously encountered in a mountain range near Nellis Air Force Base. Known for his YouTube channel under the username Snakebite McGee, Veach shared videos of his solo hiking adventures in the Mojave and Great Basin deserts, often exploring remote areas. In 2014, Veach commented on a YouTube video about the son of an Area 51 technician whose dad allegedly spilled the beans about the goings-on at the base. In the comment made by Veach, he described a strange experience during one of his hikes in the area. He claimed to have found a cave shaped like the letter M that caused his body to vibrate intensely as he approached, instilling a profound sense of fear that compelled him to retreat. This account garnered significant attention, with many urging him to locate the cave again and document his findings. Motivated by the interest and skepticism of online viewers, Veach embarked on a second journey to find the M Cave in October 2014. During this expedition, he reported encountering a black ram that observed him from a ridge throughout his entire hike. Notably, he appeared to suggest that the ram was in some way suspicious, which some have suggested shows a deteriorating mental state. As a YouTuber myself, I'm going to disagree with this statement that this fact alone indicates some sort of disconnect from reality. He was trying to create a compelling narrative about a cave to engage his audience. Adding a mysterious animal watching him likely got his audience even more engaged in the story and got more people speculating about just what exactly was going on. That said, if he genuinely believed a sinister sheep was watching him for nefarious purposes, not a good sign. Despite his efforts, he failed to relocate the cave but recorded the trip and uploaded it to his YouTube channel under the title M Cave Hike on October 18, 2014. Undeterred by previous unsuccessful attempts and warnings from concerned individuals, Veach planned a third expedition to find the elusive cave. On November 10, 2014, he set out, informing his girlfriend of his plans, but providing no specific details about his intended location. This would be the last time anyone heard from him. When he failed to return, his girlfriend reported him missing, prompting search and rescue operations. Authorities discovered his cell phone near an abandoned mine shaft in the Sheep Mountain Range, but despite extensive searches, no further traces of Veach were found. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Veach's disappearance have led to various theories. Some suggest he may have fallen victim to an accident in the treacherous terrain. Others speculate about possible foul play or even encounters with clandestine military operations, given the proximity to Nellis Air Force Base. Additionally, his girlfriend mentioned that Veach had struggled with depression, raising the possibility that he went out his own way. His girlfriend actually took the time to do a write-up on the M Cave hike video, and she really gets into all the troubles and setbacks he'd been facing. She also mentioned that Veach was definitely more daring than other hikers, which provides circumstantial evidence in favor of the accident theory. Others speculate that the entire M Cave scenario was an elaborate ruse to cover up the fact that he was going to intentionally disappear and start his life over again. I've watched some of Kenny's videos in researching for this segment, and I can say the guy seems like he's really fun and has a lot of charisma.
Hello, people of Shark Tank. My name is Kenny Veach.
On February 4th, 1986, 21-year-old Rayanne Mosser was found dead from a wound to the chest in Roanoke, Virginia. The initial investigation concluded her death was a self-deletion, but her family and several experts have since raised compelling questions challenging this determination. Rayanne, a waitress living with her parents, had recently taken a test to enlist in the Navy and was aspiring to study radiology. She had been in a relationship with a man, and on the evening of her death, she visited his home in an attempt to reconcile. According to her ex-boyfriend, after he rejected her, she threatened to delete herself, retrieved a weapon, and left the mortal plane voluntarily. 3 witnesses allegedly corroborated the ex-boyfriend's story. Notably, the witnesses and the boyfriend don't appear to have been publicly identified. The police arrived at the scene at around 8 p.m. and found Rayanne's body with a wound to her chest. Suspiciously, the weapon was found lying on the trunk of her ex-boyfriend's car. Finding quote-unquote no evidence of foul play, authorities quickly ruled her death a self-deletion, just like her boyfriend said it was. And if I didn't lay it on thick enough for you guys there, I'm being sarcastic. This scene screams foul play. Rayanne's parents, Anne and Ronald Mosser, were immediately skeptical of the ruling. They noted that Rayanne had a promising future and had not exhibited signs of any such intent. Their concerns deepened upon discovering several inconsistencies at the scene. Rayanne's car was parked across the street with the driver's door wide open, the radio blaring, and the keys still in the ignition, suggesting she left the vehicle in haste. Moreover, they questioned how the weapon, if she did it herself, ended up on the trunk of her ex-boyfriend's car, rather than beside her body. The Mossers also conducted a physical test to assess the plausibility of their daughter firing the weapon herself. Rayanne's arm length was 29 inches, while the distance from the trigger to the muzzle of the shotgun was 36 inches. Anne Mosser, whose arm length was similar to her daughter's, attempted to replicate the action using a broomstick, but found it impossible to reach the trigger. I'm going to mark this fact down in the highly suspicious column. Further complicating matters, an autopsy was not conducted immediately, even though the authorities told the parents that one would be. 2 weeks after Rayanne's death, her parents discovered that an autopsy had never been performed or even requested. They insisted on exhuming her body, and 6 months post-mortem, an autopsy was finally conducted, which revealed inconsistencies with the authorities' ruling. Seeking further analysis, the Mossers consulted Dr. John Butts, Chief Medical Examiner for North Carolina. Dr. Butts concluded that the muzzle of the weapon was several feet away from Ray Ann at the time of discharge. He noted that she had powder burns on her left hand that suggested she might have been attempting to grab or push the weapon away. Based on his findings, the original medical examiner changed the cause of death from self-deletion to pending. Then guess what the authorities did next? Absolutely nothing at all. Seriously, there was just no further investigation. Undeterred, the Mossers sought the expertise of Dr. Vincent DeMaio, a renowned forensic scientist. Dr. DeMaio criticized the initial investigation, stating that the police had prematurely concluded self-deletion without thorough examination. He demonstrated conclusively that it was physically impossible for Ray Ann to have inflicted the wound herself, suggesting that someone else pulled the trigger. Despite this compelling evidence, authorities refused to reopen the case. The Mossers also engaged a forensic ballistics expert to explore the possibility of accidental discharge. Tests involving striking the butt of the weapon against the ground failed to cause it to fire, making accidental discharge highly unlikely. Again, nothing happened and the case remained closed. In November 1988, nearly 3 years after Ray Ann's demise, the cause of death was officially changed to undetermined, where it officially remains today. It doesn't appear that the authorities undertook any meaningful additional investigations after that. Okay, so I feel like nothing about this case makes sense at all, and I'd bet a lot of you are feeling the exact same way right now. I have so many questions and no answers. There are also a lot of unknowns. Who was the boyfriend? Who were the 3 witnesses? And who owned the weapon used during the incident? It's hard to tell if this is just a case of extreme incompetence, or if there's something more sinister going on here. Connie Converse was born Elizabeth Converse on August 3, 1924, in Laconia, New Hampshire, and is perhaps one of the most influential names in music you've never heard of. She was a pioneering American singer-songwriter whose life and career were as enigmatic as they were groundbreaking. Raised in a strict Baptist household in Concord, New Hampshire, she was the middle child of a minister father and a musically inclined mother. A brilliant student, Converse graduated as valedictorian from Concord High School, earning a scholarship to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. However, after 2 years, she left academia in pursuit of a more creative life in New York City. There, she adopted the name Connie and immersed herself in the bohemian culture of Greenwich Village during the 1950s. In New York, Connie started working at a hip print shop in the Flatiron District and met a variety of cool cats who inspired her to pursue her creative endeavors. She began writing songs, accompanying herself on guitar, and performing for friends. Despite her talent, Converse struggled to gain recognition in the folk scene. However, this didn't deter her, and she continued to produce music and perform throughout the 1950s. By 1961, she was disheartened by the lack of success in her musical career, and she left New York and relocated to Ann Arbor, Michigan. There, she took on roles as a writer and editor for an academic journal at the University of Michigan. Records about Connie begin to get hazier at this point, but during this period, she is thought to have largely abandoned her musical pursuits. In August 1974, shortly after her 50th birthday, Converse sent letters to her family and friends, expressing a desire to start anew. She packed her belongings into her Volkswagen Beetle and drove away from her life in Michigan, never to be seen or heard from again. Her disappearance remains unsolved, and she is presumed to have passed away at some point after, as she would now be 100. That said, no definitive evidence has been found, and while it's improbable that she's still out there alive today, she very much could be. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's get back to 1974 for a moment. Her family hired a private investigator to look into her whereabouts, and reading between the lines on the sources, I suspect the investigator may have actually found her. According to her family, they spoke with the investigator, who informed her that it was Connie's right to go cold turkey on everyone. To me, this definitely suggests Connie may have spoken to the investigator herself and told him she has no interest in ever coming back. At any rate, her family accepted Connie's decision after this, and apparently made no further efforts to reach out to her. In 2004, nearly 3 decades after her disappearance, Connie's music resurfaced, captivating a new generation of listeners. And yeah, as of this recording, she has about 70,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, outstripping the vast majority of recording artists of her era. This was a suggestion from YouTube member Bumblebee48. Remember to leave your suggestions in the comments or to join up on a live stream. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Hope you're enjoying the latest entry in this series. I'm just taking a second to ask you to help my channel by clicking the share button and sending this video to at least one person you know. On June 28, 1991, at a rest stop near Blind River, Ontario, a brutal attack left 2 people slain and 1 injured, with the perpetrator still unidentified decades later. Gord and Jackie McAllister, a couple from Lindsay, Ontario, were en route to Winnipeg to meet up with relatives. Rather than stopping in at a roadside motel, they decided to spend the night at the Blind River rest stop off the Trans-Canada Highway. Also, I'm not sure if the name Blind River hits me different, because the first time I heard about it was on the Unsolved Mysteries segment covering this case, but I find it inherently creepy. Around 1 a.m., they were abruptly awakened by loud knocks on their motorhome's window. A man claiming to be a police officer ordered them to move their vehicle. When Jackie opened the door, the man, who was armed to the teeth, forced his way in and demanded money and valuables. Despite the couple's compliance, the assailant shot Jackie twice in the chest, eliminating her instantly. Gord was also shot but managed to escape by rolling under the motorhome. While hiding, he witnessed another vehicle entering the rest stop. The driver, 29-year-old Brian Major, approached the scene but was immediately slain by the perpetrator. After searching for Gord briefly, the perp fled the scene. Gord then drove onto the highway to seek help, but unfortunately, it was too late for Jackie and Brian. The investigation that followed was extremely extensive. Authorities released a composite sketch of the suspect based on Gord's description, leading to numerous tips and potential sightings. And you're going to want to check out the composite sketch of the offender because it's like nothing I've ever seen before. I'm not sure exactly what this technology was or why it wasn't used more at the time. All that said, my understanding is that these police sketches aren't supposed to look this hyper-realistic and are supposed to emphasize key features. But anyway, let's get back to the case itself. One witness reported nearly being hit by a blue van speeding away from the rest stop shortly after 1 a.m., heading east toward Sudbury. Despite checking over 3,500 blue vans across Canada and the US, no significant leads emerged. In 1999, a potential breakthrough occurred when former Toronto police officer Ronald Glenn West was arrested for 2 slayings in 1970. West had lived near Blind River at the time of the 1991 slayings, leading investigators to consider him a suspect. However, no charges were filed against him concerning the Blind River case, and he remains in prison for his earlier crimes. Anyway, check out the composite and compare it to West, and tell me what you think. Personally, I'm not seeing it at all, but maybe that's the problem with this hyper-realistic style. Over the years, the case has remained cold, with no new substantial leads. Unfortunately, Gord McAllister passed away in 2012 without seeing justice done for his wife. On February 2, 2008, a seemingly ordinary day in Tinley Park, Illinois, turned into a nightmare when a perpetrator entered a Lane Bryant store and eliminated 5 women, leaving a 6th injured. The incident began around 10:45 a.m. at the Lane Bryant store located in the Brookside Marketplace shopping center. The store had just opened for business when a man posing as a delivery person entered. He was described as a black male with a husky build, standing between 5 feet 9 inches and 6 feet tall. He had his hair styled in thick cornrows, including a distinctive braid adorned with 4 light green beads lying over the right side of his face at cheek level. Once inside, the man announced a robbery and herded the store manager, a part-time employee, and 4 customers into a back room. He bound their hands and feet with duct tape and forced them to lie face down. Tragically, he proceeded to eliminate each woman execution style. Miraculously, one victim survived as she shifted her head just before the blast, causing it to graze her neck. The 5 women who lost their lives were Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chuso, Rhoda McFarland, Sarah Safransky, and Connie Woolfolk. The surviving victim's testimony was instrumental in providing a description of the assailant, leading to the creation of a composite sketch. Despite this, and the offer of a $100,000 reward for information leading to the perpetrator's arrest, the case remains unsolved. Over the years, the Tinley Park Police Department has continued to pursue leads, with more than 7,000 tips received. Despite these efforts, the identity of the perpetrator remains unknown and presumably at large. Dan Wilson, a 35-year-old electrician and mechanic from Spokane, Washington, vanished under mysterious circumstances in August 1988. Known for his quiet demeanor and devout religious beliefs, Dan had recently endured a difficult period following his divorce in 1986. And when I say difficult here, I'm not talking about the usual difficult times after a divorce. In 1987, he had a full-on nervous breakdown, requiring a brief period of hospitalization. Because of this, he ended up taking nearly a year off work to recover and stabilize on his medication. Despite these challenges, he maintained a close relationship with his 2 children and was regarded as a dependable employee at a machine shop where he returned to work in June 1988. Around this time, he also went off the medication which had stabilized him after his mental health crisis. Keep this fact in the back of your mind because it's going to be important here, at least in my opinion. On August 24, 1988, Dan exhibited uncharacteristic behavior at work. An altercation with his foreman, during which he accused his supervisor of criticizing him unfairly, led to his being advised to take some time off. He departed the workplace around 11 a.m. and was not seen again by his colleagues. His absence went largely unnoticed over the weekend, as he was not scheduled to visit his children. His mother, residing in Colorado, was unable to reach him by phone but didn't immediately suspect anything. The mystery deepened when, on August 29th, authorities in Custer County, Montana, discovered Dan's white 1987 Chevrolet Spectrum abandoned along Interstate 94. The vehicle was unlocked with one door ajar and the keys missing. Inside, a Bible inscribed with Dan's name was found on the front seat, but there was no indication of his destination or reason for being over 700 miles from his home in a remote area. A thorough search of the area yielded no signs of Dan. His family, perplexed by the situation, traveled to Montana to assist in the investigation. Upon examining his vehicle, they experienced physical symptoms, including sore throats and eye irritation, which led them to have the car inspected. A mechanic discovered a faulty muffler that was allowing carbon monoxide to leak into the car's interior. This suggested that prolonged exposure could have adversely affected Dan's mental and physical state. Back in Spokane, Dan's home was found in disarray, with personal belongings such as luggage, clothing, an uncashed paycheck, and his checkbook left behind. Many have speculated that this indicated that he hadn't planned an extended trip. Friends and family recalled that in the days leading up to his disappearance, Dan appeared unusually fatigued and stressed, possibly due to his demanding work schedule and dad duties. Despite extensive efforts, including distributing missing person flyers and following up on reported sightings, Dan remained unaccounted for. Some reports suggested that a man matching his description had stayed at a homeless shelter in Billings, Montana, in November 1988. But these leads didn't result in locating him. The case reached a somber conclusion in September 1997 when a ranch worker discovered a skull near a creek, approximately 6 miles south of where Dan's car had been found. Dental records definitively confirmed that these remains were indeed him, and also confirmed that he had perished at the scene on the day he went missing. Authorities concluded that he likely became disoriented, possibly due to carbon monoxide poisoning, wandered away from his vehicle, and succumbed to the elements. The authorities don't suspect foul play in this case and have left it at that, but I'd like to take a moment to discuss my theory of the case. It's plausible that Dan's decision to stop his medication had a significant impact on his mental state and behavior. Freed from the stabilizing effects of his prescriptions, he might have experienced a resurgence of his symptoms. This heightened emotional turbulence could explain his sudden antagonism towards his foreman and the uncharacteristic impulsiveness leading him to abruptly leave work. Compounding the crisis, carbon monoxide exposure from the faulty muffler in his car likely exacerbated any psychological distress he was already experiencing. Disoriented and vulnerable, Dan could have wandered away from his vehicle. The lack of evidence pointing to foul play reinforces the theory that his demise was the tragic consequence of his deteriorating mental condition mixed with a hefty dose of carbon monoxide. In December 1967, Australia faced a mystery that remains unresolved to this day: the disappearance of its then Prime Minister, Harold Holt. On the day in question, Harold Holt decided to unwind by swimming at Cheviot Beach, a place he was familiar with and had swam at many times before. Despite warnings about the dangerous conditions that day, Holt, a reputed strong swimmer, entered the water and was tragically swept away by the undertow, disappearing from sight without a trace. His disappearance prompted one of the largest search operations in Australian history, yet no evidence of his body was ever found. The immediate aftermath of Holt's disappearance saw John McEwen, the leader of the Country Party, being sworn in as Prime Minister, and a memorial service attended by international dignitaries. However, the lack of concrete evidence regarding Holt's fate fueled widespread speculation and numerous conspiracy theories. Some of these ranged from theories about Holt's mental state and personal life, including alleged affairs and political pressures. Other theories promote more far-fetched ideas involving espionage and even a full-on defection to a foreign power. One of the most enduring theories suggested that Holt was a Chinese spy and had been picked up by a submarine, a claim that has been met with skepticism and dismissal. Other theories claim that there was involvement by the Pentagon. This theory suggests Holt was preparing to withdraw Australian support for the Vietnam War, prompting this quote-unquote intervention. Another theory, which I'll phrase euphemistically, is that he intended to take one last swim on the day in question. And no, I don't mean his last swim of the day. I mean his last one ever. This theory suggests that the stress of being the Prime Minister of Australia got to him, and he had a breakdown, leading to the fateful swim. The story known as the Russian sleep experiment has gained considerable attention over the years, especially on Reddit and YouTube. It's often presented as a historical account of a grisly scientific study allegedly conducted in the late 1940s by Soviet researchers. The experiment involved test subjects who were forced to stay awake for extended periods using a mysterious stimulant. Despite its persistent presence on the internet and the chilling nature of the narrative, there's no evidence to suggest the Russian sleep experiment is a factual historical event. Rather, it's an example of a creepypasta that developed beyond its original context into a widespread urban legend. And I suppose I should define the term creepypasta here for those who haven't heard it before. A creepypasta is a short, chilling internet story designed to unsettle or frighten readers through supernatural, psychological, or mysterious themes. They're generally presented as potentially true and are designed to spread virally by being copy and pasted into different forums like Reddit. The earliest known iterations of the Russian sleep experiment story appeared online in the early 2010s. According to the narrative, Soviet-era researchers supposedly sealed 5 political prisoners in a secluded chamber, pumping in a gas intended to prevent them from sleeping. Over several days, as the story goes, the subjects descended into madness, exhibiting a wide array of violent behavior. In its final stages, the experimenters entered the chamber and discovered that the subjects were no longer recognizable as human, having turned into something far more monstrous and surreal. The reasons for the Russian sleep experiment's popularity are multifaceted. The Cold War era is widely associated with secrecy, unethical experimentation, and human rights abuses, including forced participation in grisly trials. Projects such as the US government's MK-Ultra mind control experiments and documented Soviet abuses in psychiatric wards fuel the public's imagination and willingness to believe. This climate of distrust and historical wrongdoing sets a stage for horrifying legends to thrive. When people read the Russian sleep experiment story, they often find it plausible that authoritarian regimes might have sanctioned bizarre and inhumane research. Moreover, the story's compelling narrative structure contributes to its enduring popularity. The text doesn't rely on elaborate supernatural beings or explicit monsters. Instead, it preys on fears of psychological breakdown, loss of identity, and the fragility of human sanity. Such fears are universal and not bound by culture or language, which helps explain how the story transcended its origins and found a global audience. It's also worth noting the actual harms caused by lack of sleep, which again contributed to the story jumping from a simple creepypasta to a full-on urban legend. Going without sleep for extended periods does lead to serious cognitive and psychological impairments, including hallucinations and delusions. So yeah, if you're one of the people who likes to watch my content to pass out, this is your reminder to get a good night's sleep. And hey, while I'm out here dispensing unsolicited advice, don't forget to stay hydrated. The Chris Houlihan Room has long intrigued fans of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and more recently mystery fans in general. For the 10 people watching right now who don't know, this is a classic video game released in 1991 in Japan and the following year worldwide. This room, hidden deep within the game's code, has spawned numerous theories and speculations about its origins, as well as the identity of the mysterious Chris Houlihan. The exact date of discovery of the Chris Houlihan Room is unknown, but knowledge of it had been confirmed in print media as early as late 1994. More on that in a moment. It's an Easter egg, a hidden feature intentionally placed by the game's developers. The room contains 45 blue rupees, an in-game currency, and a unique sign reading, quote, "My name is Chris Houlihan. This is my top secret room. Keep it between us, okay?" Well, Chris, sorry, I guess I just broke the first rule of Fight Club by including this entry. The room was designed to act as a crash prevention mechanism. Notably, in the Japanese version of the game, there's no mention of the name Chris Houlihan, and it's just indicated as a secret room. If the game experienced an error or couldn't properly determine a transition point between locations, it would send the player to this fail-safe room instead of crashing outright. This type of debugging strategy was common in older games, as hardware limitations made handling unexpected errors a major challenge. What makes this Easter egg unusual is its personal message and connection to a seemingly ordinary individual, Chris Houlihan, rather than a developer or company reference. Other games of the period with these sorts of rooms generally include in-joke references to the game's developers, or things that made more sense contextually. The most widely accepted explanation for Chris Houlihan's inclusion in the game stems from a contest held by Nintendo Power, an extremely popular gaming magazine during the 1990s. The magazine hosted a competition in 1990 where the winner's name would be immortalized in an upcoming game. Chris Houlihan is believed to have won this contest, and the developers honored the prize by including his name in the secret room. This explanation, while straightforward, raises additional questions. Why was the Easter egg so obscure if it was meant to be part of a promotional campaign? And if this was the case, why did Nintendo never publicize the contest winner's inclusion? After all, one would think that having an actual fan's name included in arguably the biggest release in the lifespan of a system would be worth at least a quick press release. Some theorists argue that technical limitations or time constraints during development might have contributed to the room's obscurity. Even though the Nintendo Power Contest theory is widely presented as fact, alternative theories have emerged over the years. And I just have to be very clear here, there's never been any verification from either Nintendo Power or Nintendo that this was the case. The most official source stating this was a 1994 issue of Club Nintendo, which was Nintendo Power's Latin American counterpart. Some suggest Chris Houlihan might have had a personal connection to the localizers of A Link to the Past. Under this theory, perhaps he was the nephew of someone who worked at Nintendo. Yeah, maybe Chris Houlihan was the one kid on the playground who actually had an uncle who worked at Nintendo, who could pull off some really wild stuff like putting his name in a game. And by the way, I feel the need to say that this is my personal favorite theory by far, even though there's absolutely no evidence to substantiate the claim. Another theory proposes that Chris Houlihan's name could have been a placeholder left during development, with developers forgetting to remove it before the game's release. As for practical uses of the room, speedrunners have tried to use it to shave time off the game, but as yet haven't found a way to make it work. On February 11, 2004, 22-year-old Felicia Thomas vanished without a trace from her Lake Township residence in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. She worked at a local convenience store, the Pump and Pantry, and lived with her boyfriend, Ed Rudaski. On the night she disappeared, Felicia returned home from work between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. She was driven home from work by a male co-worker who was initially considered a suspect but was subsequently ruled out. According to Rudaski, they had a brief conversation before he went back to sleep on the couch. He claimed that was the last time he saw her, and the timeline of what happened next is very unclear, but we'll get back to that shortly. When Felicia's mother, Pauline Bailey, couldn't reach her daughter and learned she hadn't picked up her paycheck, she reported her missing on February 13th, 2004. The investigation into Felicia's disappearance soon intersected with another unresolved case. In June 2001, Felicia's close friend, 18-year-old Jennifer Barzalowski, had also vanished after being seen with Steve Martin, who was dating Jennifer's sister at the time. Felicia had been actively seeking information about Jennifer's disappearance, expressing to her mother that she was close to uncovering the truth. Notably, Martin advised the authorities that he spoke to Felicia on the phone at some point after midnight on the night in question. If true and the timeline was accurate, this would mean that he was the last person to speak with Felicia. Steve Martin quickly became a person of interest in both cases. Martin deleted himself in August 2005 while incarcerated on unrelated charges, leaving many questions unanswered. In April 2010, a significant development occurred when Jennifer Barzalowski's skull was discovered in a wooded area near Hunlock Township, close to Martin's former residence. This discovery intensified the search for Felicia, with her family believing that the cases were likely connected. Notably, authorities have taken a different view of these cases thus far, though they have come out and stated that he is a person of interest in both investigations. Over the years, Felicia's family has tirelessly advocated for renewed investigations and public awareness. Despite these efforts, Felicia's remains have not been found, and no arrests have been made in connection with her disappearance. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, better known as the Index of Forbidden Books, was a list maintained by the Roman Catholic Church that cataloged publications deemed heretical or contrary to morality. Established in the 16th century, the index aimed to protect the faithful from theological errors and preserve the integrity of church doctrine. Over its 4-century existence, it reflected the Church's efforts to control the dissemination of ideas and uphold religious orthodoxy. The roots of the index trace back to the early 16th century, a period marked by significant religious upheaval. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther in 1517, challenged the authority and teachings of the Catholic Church. In response, the Church sought mechanisms to curb the spread of what it considered heretical writings. In 1559, Pope Paul IV promulgated the first official index, listing books considered dangerous to the faith or morals of Catholics. This initial compilation was stringent, reflecting the Church's determination to counteract the influence of Protestantism and other perceived threats. The Council of Trent convened to address the challenges posed by the Reformation and recognized the need for a more systematic approach to censorship. Consequently, in 1564, the Tridentine Index was published under Pope Pius IV, accompanied by a set of guidelines known as the 10 Rules. These rules outlined the criteria for prohibiting books and the procedures for censorship. The responsibility for maintaining and updating the index was entrusted to the Sacred Congregation of the Index, established in 1571 by Pope Pius V. This body operated under the Roman Inquisition and was tasked with examining publications for heretical content. That must have been a real fun job, by the way. Sounds like these guys got to read all the hottest content. The congregation had the authority to ban books, mandate corrections, and grant permissions for reading prohibited works under specific conditions. Enforcement of the index varied across regions and periods. While the Church wielded significant influence, the practical implementation of book bans depended on local church and secular authorities. In some areas, prohibited books circulated clandestinely, and enforcement was lax, whereas in others, authorities rigorously suppressed banned literature. The index encompassed a wide array of works, including those by prominent scientists, philosophers, and theologians. Copernicus's publication, which proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, was suspended until corrected in 1616 due to its contradiction of the geocentric view endorsed by the Church. Similarly, Galileo Galilei's advocacy for Copernican heliocentrism led to his works being placed on the index, and he faced trial by the Inquisition in 1633. Philosophers such as Giordano Bruno, whose writings on cosmology and theology diverged from orthodox teachings, were also included. Bruno's works were condemned, and he was eliminated for heresy in 1600. The index listed numerous other authors, including Erasmus, Voltaire, and Jean-Paul Sartre, reflecting the Church's broad efforts to control theological and philosophical discourse. Over time, the effectiveness and relevance of the index waned, particularly as secular authorities and public opinion increasingly championed freedom of expression. Recognizing the changing intellectual climate, the Church ceased publication of the Index in 1966 under Pope Paul VI, relegating it to a historical document. Conspiracy theories about the Index of Forbidden Books suggest it was more than a tool for safeguarding faith. According to theorists, it served to suppress revolutionary ideas that could challenge the Church's authority or broader power structures. Critics argue that by banning works on science, philosophy, and governance, the Index aimed to stifle intellectual advancements and maintain control over societal narratives. Some theorists claim the Church deliberately sought to keep the public uninformed, ensuring dependence on religious doctrine rather than independent reasoning. Others speculate that certain books were included not solely for theological reasons, but to hide knowledge of ancient wisdom or esoteric secrets, threatening established religious interpretations. In Gnostic cosmology, archons are malevolent entities that govern the material world, acting as obstacles to spiritual enlightenment. The term archon derives from the Greek word meaning ruler or authority. These beings are often depicted as the creators and overseers of the physical universe, enforcing ignorance and preventing souls from attaining gnosis, knowledge of the divine realm. Central to Gnostic belief is the concept of the demiurge, a subordinate deity responsible for the creation of the material world. This entity is often identified with the God of the Old Testament and is considered ignorant or malevolent. The archons serve the demiurge, named Yaldabaoth, assisting in the construction and maintenance of the physical realm. They are typically associated with the 7 classical planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, each governed by a specific archon. This planetary association reflects the archon's roles in influencing human destiny and maintaining the soul's entrapment within the material world. The Hypostasis of the Archons, a Gnostic text from the Nag Hammadi library, provides a detailed account of these entities. It describes the archons as androgynous beings with faces resembling beasts, highlighting their corrupt and deceptive nature. Yaldabaoth, their leader, is portrayed as a lion-faced serpent, embodying arrogance, pride, and ignorance. Yaldabaoth's proclamation, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me," is said to exemplify his delusion and his lack of awareness of the true transcendent God. According to this belief, Jesus Christ represents the true universal transcendent God sent to earth, explaining the significantly different teachings of Jesus from the God of the Old Testament. Gnostic teachings emphasize that the material world, crafted by the archons, is inherently flawed and a source of suffering. Human souls, considered divine sparks, are trapped within physical bodies, subjected to the archon's control. Salvation, according to Gnostic belief, involves transcending the material realm by acquiring gnosis. This esoteric knowledge enables individuals to recognize their divine origin and navigate past the archons, ultimately reuniting with the true God. The archons' influence extends to human thoughts and behaviors. They are believed to instill ignorance, fear, and material desires, diverting souls from spiritual awakening. By manipulating human consciousness, the archons maintain their dominion over the material world, ensuring that souls remain ensnared in the cycle of birth and rebirth. To paraphrase the late great Norm Macdonald, with the archons, the more I learn about those guys, the more I don't care for them. Hey, it's your boy Jimmy here with a quick shout out to all my subscribers, patrons, and YouTube members. The theory that fossil fuels are actually renewable revolves around several core beliefs and interpretations of geology generally accepted to be pseudoscientific. According to this theory, fossil fuels like crude oil, natural gas, and coal are not, as conventionally understood, finite resources formed over millions of years from decomposed organic material. Instead, proponents argue that these fuels are constantly replenished through processes occurring deep within the Earth, making them effectively renewable. A key aspect of the theory is the idea that the term fossil fuels was coined by powerful figures in the oil industry, such as John D. Rockefeller, to create an artificial sense of scarcity. This scarcity, it is suggested, was meant to keep prices high and control the market, allowing a handful of powerful entities to profit immensely from energy production. Supporters of this narrative point out that the term fossil fuels was used to make people believe these energy sources were rare and irreplaceable, thereby justifying high costs and monopolistic practices. Some advocates of the theory argue that evidence of oil reserves seemingly refilling over time supports their claims. There are cases where previously depleted oil wells have been observed to contain new quantities of oil, which proponents interpret as proof that oil is being continually generated. They often cite the idea of abiotic oil, a theory which posits that oil is formed from inorganic substances rather than decomposed biological matter. According to this view, hydrocarbons originate deep in the Earth's crust, through chemical reactions involving carbon deposits that have no biological origin. This interpretation suggests that oil is not millions of years old, and that new oil can be produced within the Earth on a much shorter timescale. The geological processes that allegedly create oil, according to the conspiracy, involve complex reactions under conditions of high pressure and temperature. Proponents often claim that there is a vast network of interconnected reservoirs deep beneath the Earth's surface that continually replenish the deposits we extract. The theory implies that current technology and exploration practices have only scratched the surface of what is available, and that much of the Earth's oil reserves remain untapped or deliberately undisclosed. Supporters of this conspiracy also claim that the idea of oil scarcity is used to control global geopolitics. Since the major players in the oil industry are often closely linked to governments and international institutions, the scarcity narrative is seen as a tool to influence foreign policy and economic stability. Further conspiracy theorists argue that this even gives justification for certain military actions. By convincing the public that oil is a limited resource, these entities are thought to justify the need for conflicts over oil-rich regions, ensuring dominance over energy supplies. Despite widespread concerns about peak oil in the 20th century, when it was predicted that oil production would decline as reserves were depleted, new oil discoveries have continued. Further yet, production rates have often exceeded expectations, and oil production has continued to increase in an upward trajectory. The theory interprets this as proof that oil fields are refilling naturally, suggesting an ongoing process rather than a finite supply that is gradually being exhausted. Debunkers argue that the conspiracy that fossil fuels are renewable hinges on an overly simplistic view of how these fuels form. According to them, it ignores the distinct requirements of time, pressure, and specific geological conditions necessary for the transformation of organic material into hydrocarbons. The amount of time required, millions of years, is crucial. Current consumption rates are such that we are depleting reservoirs without any meaningful possibility of natural replenishment. They emphasize that the underlying science of how fossil fuels are made contradicts any narrative suggesting they are renewable on a timescale relevant to human society. Chad Langford was a 20-year-old military police patrolman stationed at Redstone Arsenal near Huntsville, Alabama. On March 12, 1992, he was found in critical condition under mysterious circumstances and later succumbed to his injuries. The official ruling, which stated that he did it himself, has been consistently challenged by his family and others, who point to numerous anomalies and unanswered questions surrounding his death. Langford's military career began with promise. Raised in Elk Creek, California, he joined the Army immediately after high school, serving a tour in South Korea, where he earned several good conduct medals. Subsequently, he was assigned to the military police at Redstone Arsenal. In early 1992, Langford confided in his father, Jim Langford, about his involvement in undercover operations targeting substances on the base and illegal weapons. He expressed concerns about his safety, mentioning that he had received death threats and feared for his life if his undercover status were compromised. On the evening of his death, Langford radioed his dispatch around 7:40 p.m., reporting that he was investigating an abandoned vehicle. When fellow military police arrived at the scene, they found his military ID, armband, and portable radio deliberately arranged in the middle of the road. But there was no sign of Langford. Approximately a quarter-mile away, they discovered him near his patrol car in a dire state. His hat was stuffed in his mouth, the radar cable was wrapped around his neck, his pistol strap bound his ankles, and a handcuff was secured to his left wrist. Notably, the words March 3rd and Robert were written on his left hand. His service pistol, which had been fired twice, was found beneath his left shoulder. Langford had sustained a gunshot wound to the head and was barely alive. He was rushed to Huntsville Hospital, where he died a few hours later. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division conducted a 4-month review and concluded that Langford's death was self-inflicted. Their report suggested that he had fabricated stories of undercover work and was experiencing psychological distress, possibly exacerbated by a recent breakup with his girlfriend. The CID's psychological autopsy portrayed Langford as having lifelong emotional issues and claimed that he staged an elaborate scenario to make his death appear as a heroic stand. They claimed that he had hoped to achieve in death the recognition he felt eluded him in life. Langford's family vehemently disputed this ruling. His father, Jim, found it implausible that his son would end himself, especially without reaching out to certain family members beforehand. He emphasized that Langford had not contacted him or his grandmother to say goodbye, which he believed his son would have done if contemplating this act. Additionally, Langford's ex-girlfriend, Roxanne, contested the CID's narrative, stating that their breakup was initiated by Langford due to his work commitments, not emotional distress. That said, Roxanne did report some potentially disturbing changes in Langford. She recalled seeing him days before his death, noting a dramatic change in his appearance, which she found mildly concerning at the time. Several aspects of the case have fueled suspicions of foul play and a potential cover-up. Laboratory tests didn't conclusively show that Langford had fired a weapon, and unidentified fingerprints were found on his belongings. The positioning of his body also raised questions about the plausibility of the official narrative. Further, on the night of Langford's death, military police stopped 2 vehicles near the scene. However, the drivers were neither identified nor questioned, a lapse that critics argue indicates a lack of thorough investigation. Also, Langford had informed his father about his involvement in undercover operations on the base. The CID denied any knowledge of such assignments, claiming this was all part of a plot to make himself look like a hero. This, of course, has led to speculation about either a cover-up or unauthorized operations. In 1993, amid growing concerns about the accuracy of self-deletion rulings in the military, Congress requested the Pentagon to review 40 cases, including Langford's. This initiative aimed to address potential misclassifications and ensure thorough investigations. The results of this investigation have never been made public, which again has fueled suspicion. The business plot was a conspiracy in 1933 that involved several prominent business figures. These individuals reportedly aimed to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt and replace him with an authoritarian right-wing leader. Central to this plot was Major General Smedley Butler, a highly decorated Marine Corps officer. Butler was approached to lead the coup, but instead of participating, he exposed the conspiracy to Congress. The plot was largely fueled by discontent among elite business circles with Roosevelt's New Deal policies, which they saw as socialist and a threat to capitalism. Butler testified that the conspirators, including Gerald C. McGuire, a Wall Street bond salesman, and several others, planned to create a super organization that could rival the U.S. government. Butler stated that they promised him control over a 500,000-strong army of veterans to march on Washington, D.C., and install him as the leader. This army would then take over and force Roosevelt into a figurehead position, with the real power lying with a proposed new Secretary of General Affairs. The main figures linked to the plot were connected to Wall Street firms, and it was claimed that substantial financial backing would be available for this coup. However, direct evidence connecting some financiers was not fully corroborated during congressional hearings. Gerald McGuire, the man who initially approached Butler, had allegedly spent time in Europe studying authoritarian movements and returned to the U.S. with ideas about replicating these regimes. Butler's claims were investigated by the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, a precursor to the House Un-American Activities Committee. And yeah, I can see why a rebrand was in order there. No further comment necessary. His testimony received significant attention, but the committee found insufficient evidence to indict any of the supposed key players in the plot. McGuire denied the charges, and others whom Butler implicated were never formally called to testify. The committee acknowledged that discussions had taken place regarding the establishment of a fascist organization, but it stopped short of concluding that there was a legitimate, immediate threat. Despite the lack of concrete legal action, Butler's testimony was highly influential in publicizing concerns about the rise of extremist sentiments in certain business sectors. After the business plot was exposed, some theorists speculate that its backers sought subtler, legal ways to achieve similar goals. Instead of a coup, theorists argue they may have used lobbying, media influence, and financial pressure to shape policies that aligned with their interests, weakening New Deal programs over time. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here reminding you to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell. The concept of the witches' Sabbath has a rich and complex history that stretches back to medieval Europe. It was believed to be a gathering where witches convened to worship the devil, engage in forbidden rites, and practice malevolent magic. These nocturnal assemblies were thought to occur in secluded places like forests, mountains, or abandoned ruins, and basically any place where regular people dared not tread. During the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, fear of witchcraft intensified. The publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer played a pivotal role in shaping perceptions of witchcraft and the witches' Sabbath. This treatise provided detailed descriptions of witches' practices, including the Sabbaths, and became a guide for inquisitors and witch hunters across Europe. The text insisted that witches were predominantly, though not exclusively, women, asserting that female susceptibility to demonic influence stemmed from inherent weaknesses. Kramer described the Sabbath as a place where witches renounced their Christian faith, paid homage to the devil, and participated in orgiastic rites. Confessions obtained during witch trials often followed a similar pattern. Under extreme duress, accused individuals recounted attending Sabbaths where they engaged in heinous acts. These narratives, though coerced, reinforced the belief in a widespread diabolical conspiracy and justified the continuation of witch hunts. Artists like Francisco Goya portrayed the witch's Sabbath in his works, capturing the dark and ominous atmosphere associated with these gatherings. Also, if you're one of those people who just listens, I definitely encourage you to take a look at Goya's eerie depiction of a witch's Sabbath now. It looks like something from a black metal album cover, and honestly, I'm sure it's been used in that capacity. Regional folklore added unique elements to the concept of the witch's Sabbath. In Central Europe, it was associated with the Brocken Mountain in Germany, where witches were believed to meet on Walpurgis Night. Notably, this event honors Saint Walpurga, who was successful in converting the local tribal populations to Christianity, as well as having them denounce witchcraft. In Scotland, witches were said to conjure storms at their Sabbaths for the purposes of running merchant ships up against the rocks. Such stories highlight how local events and fears could be incorporated into the broader narrative of witchcraft. By the 17th century, skepticism about the reality of the witch's Sabbath began to emerge. Thinkers challenged the existence of witchcraft and the validity of the Sabbath narratives. In modern times, the witch's Sabbath has been reinterpreted within neo-pagan and Wiccan movements. Practitioners often reinterpret the Sabbath positively. These gatherings celebrate nature, spirituality, and communal bonds rather than malevolent and evil events. Gerald Gardner, considered the founder of modern Wicca, incorporated elements of supposed historical witchcraft practices into the religion's rituals. But back to traditional witches' Sabbaths for one moment. Some scholars argue that these gatherings were misinterpretations of pre-Christian fertility rites and festivals. Other scholars have proposed theories about a secret pagan cult that survived Christianization, though such theories are generally considered to be untrue by mainstream academics. Some conspiracy theorists propose that the existence of legitimate witches' Sabbaths prior to modern times have been suppressed. These theorists generally approach this from one of two angles. The first angle is that the existence of the witches' Sabbath has been suppressed because the elites themselves participate in and draw power from these ceremonies. Others propose these activities were suppressed by the elite because they didn't want people to know they could have independent power outside the existing religious power structures. Under this theory, witchcraft is a powerful force for liberation from sometimes oppressive traditions. Operation Gladio was a clandestine stay-behind operation that emerged in Western Europe after 1945, and it has since become a topic of historical investigation and conspiracy theories. Established under the auspices of NATO and supported by the CIA, Gladio's primary intent was to create a network of secret paramilitary groups that could resist a potential Soviet invasion. Although the exact details and extent of its activities remain somewhat murky, Operation Gladio's exposure in the early 1990s sparked shock and controversy. To understand Operation Gladio, it's important to consider the political and military climate of its inception. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe was divided between the capitalist West and the communist East. As Churchill stated, an iron curtain had descended across the continent. Western governments feared that the Soviet Union's influence might spread into vulnerable Western states, potentially orchestrating coups or revolution. In response, NATO, with significant involvement from US and British intelligence agencies, sought to establish stay-behind networks of trained operatives. These individuals were expected to engage in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and clandestine resistance if the Red Army advanced. These networks were armed and supplied with caches of equipment hidden throughout various Western European countries. While Gladio initially seemed like a logical deterrent against Soviet aggression, it soon took on a much more sinister life of its own. Italy was one of the key places where Gladio's existence came to light, and indeed, the very name Gladio is derived from the Latin word for a Roman short sword, gladius. In 1990, the Italian Prime Minister admitted publicly that the project existed, and a wave of astonishment and political scandal ensued. Theorists started to attempt to connect the dots to a variety of politically motivated acts that had taken place in Italy over the previous 4.5 decades. His revelation confirmed that Italy had hosted a network of secret operatives linked to NATO's anti-communist strategy. The mere presence of these secret armies would have been controversial enough, but Operation Gladio's shadowy history is also entwined with allegations of the so-called strategy of tension. The strategy of tension refers to the alleged use of covert violence and fear to sway public opinion, provoke backlash against particular political groups, and justify repressive state actions. Among the most disturbing claims are that Gladio operatives or their affiliates may have been connected to false flag attacks, such as bombings intended to be blamed on left-wing extremists. Italian investigators and a handful of journalists have long raised the possibility that Gladio-linked individuals played a role in attacks on European soil during the Cold War era. While conclusive evidence remains elusive, the persistence of these allegations has fueled conspiracy theories and stoked significant public mistrust. The years of lead in Italy, running from the late 1960s to the late 80s, was a period of incredible violence from political extremists on both sides. Many conspiracy theorists speculate that the left-wing extremists were funded by the Soviet Union, while the right-wing extremists received support from NATO and the CIA via Gladio. One of the most infamous cases often cited in Gladio conspiracy narratives is the 1980 Bologna railway station bombing, which killed 85 people and injured over 200. Although official investigations mostly attributed the bombing to independent right-wing agitators, conspiracy theorists link this strike to Gladio. However, it's crucial to note that these claims are not universally accepted. Mainstream historians and independent scholars stress that definitive proof linking Gladio directly to such atrocities has never been conclusively demonstrated. Despite this, the very secrecy and lack of transparency around Operation Gladio have allowed these conspiracy theories to flourish. Without official archives fully opened and with many documents still classified, it's no surprise that speculation thrives. Some believe that NATO and the CIA were not merely preparing for a possible Soviet invasion, but were actively shaping European politics by clandestine means. Under this theory, CIA-backed thugs were used to safeguard conservative and centrist governments at the expense of left-wing parties. The true nature of the extent of Operation Gladio is unknown at present, and will almost certainly remain unknown until further records are declassified. Osiris, one of the most significant deities in ancient Egyptian mythology, holds an intriguing place in the pantheon. While there is little actual belief in Osiris today, if certain theorists are to be believed, the influence of Osiris can still be felt across the world today, but more on that in a moment. Revered as the god of the afterlife, fertility, and resurrection, Osiris's influence is deeply tied to Egyptian concepts of kingship, death, and the natural cycles of life. Osiris was the eldest son of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, born into a divine family that also included his siblings Isis, Set, and Nephthys. From the outset, Osiris was destined for greatness, marked by his ascension to the throne of Egypt, a position predestined by Ra himself. As king, he ruled with Isis, and was celebrated for civilizing the land, introducing agriculture and law. Osiris's association with the cultivation of wheat and barley tied him symbolically to the fertility of the Nile, reinforcing his role as a life-giving deity. The central myth of Osiris, though, revolves around his tragic slaying and subsequent resurrection. His jealous brother Set, desiring Osiris's throne, plotted his demise. After being slain and chopped up by Set, Osiris was brought back to life by his wife Isis, who collected his parts and conducted a ritual to give him temporary life. During this period of resurrection, Osiris fathered Horus. This act symbolizes the cycle of death. Osiris's death paralleled the Nile's seasonal ebb and flow, where its flooding represented life and growth. Osiris's death was only the beginning of his journey. Osiris did not return to rule the living once more. Instead, he became the ruler of the underworld, overseeing the judgment of the dead. In this role, Osiris judged the souls of the dead in the Hall of Mot, where a person's heart was weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart was lighter, the soul was deemed virtuous and granted entry into the afterlife. If not, it was devoured by the monstrous Ammit. This portrayal of Osiris as a just and merciful judge became one of the most prominent aspects of his character in later Egyptian belief, with him taking this exact role over from Anubis. Unlike other gods of the dead, Osiris is a very positive and hopeful figure who was revered rather than feared. Notably, his connection to the Nile further strengthened his role as a symbol of regeneration. The river's seasonal flooding, which brought fertile silt to the farmlands, was likened to Osiris's own resurrection. In fact, annual festivals celebrated his death and rebirth, with rituals involving the planting of seeds, symbolizing Osiris's return from the dead. The myth of Osiris also played a significant role in shaping Egyptian kingship. Originally, pharaohs were associated with the sun god Ra in the Old Kingdom period. However, as Osiris became increasingly popular, they sought to align themselves with devotion to him. Pharaohs were seen as living embodiments of Horus, the son of Osiris, and upon their death, they would merge into Osiris and become one with him. Over time, Osiris's cult became the most widespread of all Egyptian gods. His primary worship center was in Abydos, where festivals were held in his honor, drawing large crowds who participated in rituals mimicking the myth of his death and resurrection. Pilgrims from all over Egypt would journey there, hoping to secure a closer association with Osiris in the afterlife. They did this either by having their bodies buried there or by commissioning stelae bearing their names. Some scholars note similarities between Osiris and Jesus, especially regarding themes of death and resurrection. Both figures are believed to have died and returned to offer eternal life. However, most scholars believe these parallels likely reflect shared archetypal themes innate to humanity rather than a direct influence, though the question remains open. Scholars in favor of this position argue that early Christians might have drawn from these themes, particularly as Greco-Roman culture was exposed to Egyptian myths during the Hellenistic period. These scholars also noted that many of the earliest non-Jewish converts to Christianity were Egyptians who the day before their conversion were likely worshiping Osiris. It's been argued that these early converts may have imprinted their pre-existing understanding of Osiris onto Jesus. Personally, I find it difficult to believe the mystery will ever be solved, because the people who are most likely to investigate the connection likely have a vested interest in disproving it.